today I'm going to tell you guys a little bit about beheading in New Mexico. So in Spanish colonial New Mexico, beheading was the most common form of execution. So if you were charged and found guilty of a crime that was punishable by death, and the execution was beheading, they would drag you onto the plaza, they would behead you, then they would put your head on a spike like on top of where the governor's palace is, so that way they could display it as a warning to anybody else. That's just the way things were back then. I'm going to give you a couple examples of some beheadings that took place in New Mexico. So in 1598, when Oñate came and settled in San Juan, New Mexico, a lot of his people didn't want to be there. They wanted to come at first, but they had high expectations. So when they got here, their expectations weren't met. So some of them would desert Oñate and flee south. But desertion is punishable by death, so those who deserted would be executed by beheading. So there's this story about these 5 men who deserted from Oñate and fled south. This had to have been anywhere between 1598 and 1607. Oñate sent his captain, who was named Gaspar Villagra, to capture them and execute them. He caught up with them, and he did execute all 5 of them by chopping their heads off. But then after he did that, hypocritically, he fled south and deserted Oñate himself. Now I don't know if he ever got caught for this and executed, but that's just the story. So another interesting beheading that took place in New Mexico history happened in 1641. Governor Luis de Rosas was assassinated, and the men who assassinated him were dragged onto the plaza and beheaded one by one. So basically they assassinated the governor for not being Catholic. While he was in office, they said that he was a Lutheran and a Calvinist, and that he was telling the people of Santa Fe to reject Jesus. Now I don't know if this is true or not, but that's what they said he did, and that's why they assassinated him. While they took him to trial, and he was found not guilty of these charges. And then in 1641, he left office. And after that, there was a city councilman named Antonio Baca who took it into his own hands to bring Rosas back under trial, convict him as guilty, and lock him up in a cell while it was the residence under guard. So it's pretty much a cell. He did this illegally, by the way, against the government. That's why he waited till he was out of office until he did it. One night, a group of men broke into the residence that he was held prisoner at, and they stabbed him with a sword. So they say it was about 6 men who did this, and so all these men were dragged onto the plaza and beheaded one by one. And this was done by the new governor, whose name was Alonso Pacheco, and he had council member Antonio Baca arrested for what he did. They dragged him onto the plaza and they beheaded him as well. But even further, they got his head and they nailed it to a post. And this was as a warning to warn anybody that would try to oppose him while he was governor. Anyway, then in 1837, there was another governor who had his head chopped off during the Taos Rebellion. So in 1821, Mexico took control of New Mexico. And when they did, they started taxing the New Mexicans excessively. So the people of northern New Mexico offered their protection. Since they were all the way in the north, they offered protection from anybody who would try to invade New Spain from the north. And in exchange for this protection, Spain exempted them from paying taxes. So they never had to pay taxes. So when the Mexican government took control in 1821 and was making them pay all these taxes, pushing all these taxes, people were getting mad. Now the first governor of New Mexico under the Mexican rule was Albino Perez. So he was the one enforcing Mexican taxes. So the people didn't like him. The people of New Mexico already disliked him. They hated him. And the people of Taos Pueblo, who hadn't paid taxes in all these years, hated him the most. So the deal that they had with Spain was only going to last until 1837. And now that Mexico took control of New Mexico, it wasn't going to be renewed. The Mexican government was overtaxing everybody. They were taking a third of everything, and they were taxing them for everything you could think of. So the Taos people rose up in rebellion. So Governor Albino Perez gathered 200 men and rode north to stop the rebellion. And remember, I told you most of New Mexico didn't like Governor Albino Perez. So he ran into the opposition about 20 miles north of Santa Fe in San Ildefonso Pueblo. And when he ran into them, most of the 200 men he had went to the other side. So him and his remaining men fled south. But some Native Americans from Santo Domingo Pueblo caught him right on the outskirts of Santa Fe, and they chopped his head off. It's said that they played sports with by kicking it around like a soccer ball. They also killed about 20 more government officials. Then they proclaimed one of their own, Jose Gonzalez of Taos, the governor of New Mexico. Of course, this was considered treason, and in 1838, a former governor named Manuel Armijo retook control and put down the rebellion. Then he arrested and executed this Jose Gonzalez of Taos Pueblo by chopping off his head and displaying it in Santa Fe for everybody to see. And he did that as a warning for anybody else that was even thinking about rebelling. Anyway, so that was my little presentation on beheading in New Mexico. I hope you learned something new. Thank you for watching. This is Tragedy.